So we'll just let that sit there and finish doing its thing. Since this camera can only, when it's not plugged into a computer, it can only store 2 gigabytes of material at a time. You'll notice that these videos are chopped up into several parts. It just automatically switches to a new one. So while that's evaporating, I'm going to get out my vacuum filtration apparatus, and all that is in drawer D. So I'm going to be having a total volume of about 5 milliliters of acetone. So a Hirsch funnel, one of these guys, will be a good one. Right, I want that kind of Hirsch funnel. There's filter paper that fits that, at least there should be. And there's an adapter, right? This is a number 3 filtration adapter. That's going to create a tight seal to the filter flask. And I want a 25 milliliter filter flask. So my assembly is going to look like that. But it looks like somebody stole the filter paper from this one. We'll put it in the wrong drawer. So I will have to find filter paper in another location. So I'm going to clamp that because that will have a tendency to fall over. Now I'm going to clamp it so that the part I need to have access to is pointing up front. So that way this won't fall over and spill my stuff all over the place. And then I need a vacuum hose, which is one of these thick-walled black rubber tubing. So I'll connect my vacuum hose to the vacuum. And I'm going to bring my clamp assembly over here. So now that's ready for vacuum filtration. I can turn it on and make sure it's working. And it is. So I just need some filter paper. And as I said, filter paper should live in drawer D in a little vial, right in the same location as the other funnels and things. A piece of filter paper. I want to make sure it covers the holes. And that's not in the right place. Got clips going up here. Nobody checked out of these in the spring, so they're probably not in very good shape. So you'll notice if we come over here, we're no longer dripping off the coils. The sound of the pump is now kind of high-pitched, and it looks like our layer of liquid or oil in there is probably fairly constant. So the rotovapping is done. I'm going to grab a piece of paper towel, because the easiest way to dry the flask is to simply raise it up and then wipe it off with the paper towel while it's still spinning. So now we have our flask dry. I'm going to turn off the water bath. So you want to do things in the opposite order. Remove it first. Then we want to close the pump off by closing this stopcock so the pump is no longer connected to the system. Then we're going to open the system to let air in because we don't want to try to pull that off while it's still sucking vacuum. And then the last thing we'll do is stop the rotation. And we can remove our little cat clip and take our flask off. And I'm going to remove this adapter as well and put it back. Since I'm the last person to use this today, I'm going to open this up so it's pulling air and then turn off the pump. And then close it again. And then I can turn off the power strip and unplug it. So the rotovap will be ready for the next person. And I will let this water drain because there's probably a little bit of MTBE in the water bath now that we don't want in there. This may solidify if we let it sit for a little while, so I'm going to go ahead and let this sit for a bit. Something I forgot to do, I forgot to tare this flask and find out what the mass of this 100 milliliter flask is. I really wanted to do that before I wrote about the material down, so I'd know how much liquid I had. So I'm going to go ahead and weigh this now, but then I'll have to clean this flask and weigh it again to get the mass of the empty flask later. So I'll put the little lamp in there and tare it. So we're at 0, and then I can open up the top and put my flask in there. So the mass of the flask plus the crude trimyristin looks like it's 94.820 grams. Seems fairly stable at 94.820 grams. So you should write that down in your lab notebook. 94.820 grams is the mass of the flask plus the crude trimyristin, which I think you can see is now kind of a orangey, oily liquid. We would call that an orange oil. So that's the isolation of the crude trimyristin. And you can see it's starting to solidify. Since it has a pretty low melting point, doesn't necessarily always solidify like this, but looks like we've got some nice solid. So after sitting around for a little bit, we've got a orangey tan solid. Looks like it's still a little wet, but that's kind of nice. It's a pure white solid when it's actually purified. So the next step is to add 5 milliliters of acetone. We're going to dissolve that and we're going to recrystallize it from acetone. So approximately 5 mils. That's 6. There's 5 milliliters of acetone. Let it run down the sides a little bit. Again, just solvent, doesn't need to be cleaned. Done with the cap clip, I'm going to put that away. And I want to get this to dissolve, which will require heating it a little bit, which is why I had that water bath still there. I could also have used the water bath from the rotobath. Once I get this to dissolve completely, I'm going to want to rapidly transfer that to a clean and dry 25 milliliter Erlenmeyer flask. This one looks like it's pretty clean. And then I'll let that cool slowly, and hopefully we'll get a nice white solid out. So I'm just going to heat that gently in the water bath. I'm looking to get a uniform, clear solution again, rather than that cloudy suspension. This water bath is probably at about 40 degrees, 45 degrees now. Right, so you notice I got a nice oil, or not oil, I've got a nice clear orangey solution. Hopefully you can see clear orangey solution. My camera is pointing at the right angle. And then I'm going to pour that quickly before it has a chance to start crystallizing into the 25 milliliter Erlenmeyer flask. I want that to cool pretty slowly, so I'm going to upend a beaker over the top of it just to get a little bit of less air flow. And now I'm done with the water bath, so I can go ahead and turn that off. This goes in drawer D. That's dry. You can put that away. As long as I make sure that the core doesn't touch the surface of the hot plate, I can put the hot plate away by simply coiling the cord up underneath it. Right? Make sure that the cord doesn't touch the hot part, and that can go back. Done with that. I'm going to want to rinse the filter cake once I do the filtration with a little bit of ice cold acetone. So while you weren't looking, I went ahead and I put a bottle of acetone into the ice machine. So I can put this one back because I have a ice cold acetone bottle waiting in the ice machine. So that's going to crystallize, and we're just not going to rush it. We don't need the iron ring anymore, so we can put that away. Notice they're organized by size. We get different size iron rings and different sides of the cabinet. And this can be cleaned and put in the oven to join the other one. We're waiting for that to crystallize. Fortunately, I'm the only one doing lab work right now, so I'll be able to identify which flask I put in there so I can weigh it and get the mass of the empty flask, so I can get the actual mass of the liquid since I forgot to weigh it. That's a very common mistake. You'll do it multiple times in your chemistry career, no doubt. Sometimes people will put little reminders to tear their flask all over the lab, like written on the glass and written in their lab notebook and written in their lab manual. That flask was a little dirty when I started, so I might need to do a little bit more scrubbing to get that suitably clean. And as I said, sometimes we use soft scrub if the flask gets persistently dirty, especially with a greasy substance like trimyristin. But I think I can get this clean enough with the regular soap. I didn't leave very much residue. That in the oven. If once that reaches room temperature we still don't have crystals, then we will stick it in a little ice bath to try to convince it that it's time to crystallize. Sometimes it takes a little while. Let that sit up there, that can dry a bit. swirl. I think you maybe ought to see that we're starting to get a few crystals in there. Give that a little time. Wipe down the lab bench. You can fast forward through this part. That's not soluble in water. That phospholipid acid, that's going to stay there. To get rid of that, I'll have to wash it with ethanol. Very soluble in vodka. Still a little warm. Definitely some crystals. There, you can see it's getting a little cloudy. So, best thing to do with that is just let it sit some more. I'm going to turn off the camera because there's no point in you